In God's eyes, we are all wicked. In God's eyes, we're all unrighteous. God does call us to turn away from sin. We think of the homeless shelters. They bring people in, they give them food and maybe fresh clothes and a place to sleep at night. But then there's the catch. They got to sit through a sermon and listen to what the Lord has to say too. And yet they continue to offer this freely to them day after day. And the Lord continues to offer it to us freely as well. Even in our sin, he continues to offer us that satisfying food, that spiritual food. And it says this, and he will have mercy on him and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. There's certainly passages that talk about if you don't turn to the Lord, if you continue in your wicked ways. If I had to ask, none of us likes to think about ourselves as being wicked. We can maybe admit we're sinful, but are we really wicked? Sadly, yes. We try to think, we think wicked, that's that person over there. That's that person who never thinks about God, never turns away. And yet, the standard that God has for all of us is one that none of us measure up to. In God's eyes, we are all wicked. In God's eyes, we're all unrighteous. In man's eyes, we try to kind of rank people, well, that one's a little nicer than I'm not as bad as that person there. And yet, all of us need to turn and forsake our ways and turn our unrighteous thoughts back to God and his righteous thoughts. And here, start looking at verse 8, we get to what those righteous thoughts are. Verse 8 says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Okay, this is one of those verses or passages here that immediately jumped out at me. One that I've heard lots and lots of times through different messages, through different thoughts, and especially when you're questioning God. This is a verse that we're often taken to see that for God's thoughts, this is God speaking here, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." And of course, we often get this out of context. But a lot of context really isn't needed for this because God is outside of our context. That's the whole point here, really, is the fact that God is outside. He's in the heavens. He's outside. No matter what might be happening to us, God sees the whole picture. The fact that he's higher than this, he sees more than we see. And if you've had children or if you've worked with children, a lot of times you know that what you can see from your vantage point is a lot different than what they can see from their vantage point. And not just how high or how small they are, but from a wisdom point of view and a wisdom standard. And, what we want as children, or even what we want as humans, a lot of times differs from what God sees as best for our lives. And again, we come to the idea here of, why are we spending our time and our money on things that aren't satisfying us? God, who can see everything, he knows what's best for us. He can see what's going to satisfy us. He sees what we really long for, where that abundance truly is going to come from in our lives. And he's sharing it with us and reminding us that his ways are not as our ways. Especially when you look at our society. You just have to drive down the highway and look at the billboards. And you see that what man is seeking after is not the same as what God is seeking after. We need a lot of the physical things in this earth. I'm not saying that those things are bad. God is not saying that the food and the drink and the things are bad. He's saying those even help us lead us to God. An understanding of what our true needs are actually helps us to know what our spiritual needs are. I think it was C.S. Lewis who says, the fact that we have needs points to the fact that there is a God and a creator. When we understand that we have a longing for something and we don't see what it is, it points to the fact that there is a spiritual realm that we don't see and understand. It leads us to God, those longings that we have in our life. Just as hunger leads us to food and thirst leads us to water, spiritual longing leads us to God.